Maria Martinez stood on the corner of 5th and Main, holding her 6-month-old baby Emma close to her chest. The morning was cold, and she had wrapped her daughter in her only warm blanket, leaving herself with just a thin jacket. She hadn't eaten since yesterday, saving the last bit of formula for Emma's morning bottle. "Please," she whispered to each passing stranger, "can you help us with something to eat?" Most people hurried past, avoiding eye contact. Some muttered about getting a job, not knowing that Maria had lost hers at the diner when they closed down last month. Her savings were gone, and the apartment's rent was due in 3 days. Emma started to fuss, and Maria gently bounced her, fighting back tears. "Shh, mi amor. It's okay. Mama's here." She kissed her daughter's forehead, remembering how different things were just a year ago. She had a steady job, a boyfriend who promised to stick around, and dreams of going back to school. Then came the pregnancy, and Jason disappeared faster than a summer storm. The sound of expensive tires rolling to a stop caught her attention. A black Mercedes had pulled up to the curb, its windows tinted dark as night. Maria's heart started beating faster. In her experience, people in fancy cars either ignored you completely or called the police. The driver's window rolled down smoothly, revealing a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked black hair and kind eyes. She wore a designer suit that probably cost more than 6 months of Maria's old rent, but there was something in her expression that wasn't cold or judgmental like the others. "How long have you been out here?" the woman asked, her voice carrying a slight accent that reminded Maria of her own mother. 3 weeks, Maria answered honestly, adjusting Emma's blanket. "Since they closed the diner where I worked." The woman's eyes focused on Emma, who had stopped fussing and was now looking at the stranger with curious eyes. "And the baby's father?" "Gone." Maria didn't elaborate. She'd learned to keep those painful stories short. The woman nodded, then did something unexpected. She turned off her car engine. "My name is Isabella Rodriguez. I own a few restaurants in the city." She opened her car door and stepped out, her heels clicking on the pavement. "When was the last time you two had a proper meal?" Before Maria could answer, Emma started crying again. This time, Maria knew it wasn't just fussiness, it was hunger. The last formula can was almost empty. "Come," Isabella said, gesturing to her car. "I know a quiet place where we can talk. You look like you could use a warm breakfast, and I've been told I'm a good listener." Maria hesitated. Her mother had always warned her about getting into cars with strangers, but there was something about Isabella that felt safe. Maybe it was the way she looked at Emma with genuine concern, or how she stood at a respectful distance, giving Maria space to decide. "I don't need charity," Maria said softly, her pride fighting with her desperation. Isabella smiled. "Good, because I'm not offering charity. I'm offering an opportunity. The rest is up to you." Emma's cry grew louder, and Maria felt her resistance crumbling. "Okay," she said finally. "Thank you." As Isabella helped her into the car, making sure Emma's blanket was secure, Maria noticed the small gold pendant around the woman's neck, a guardian angel. It caught the morning light, sending a warm glimmer across Emma's face, making her smile for the first time that day. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving behind the cold corner where Maria had stood for weeks. She didn't know it yet, but that moment, that simple decision to accept help from a stranger, would change not only her life but the lives of many others in ways she couldn't imagine. Isabella drove them to a small restaurant in a quiet part of town. The sign read, "Casa Isabella," and though it wasn't open for business yet, she used her keys to let them in. The warmth inside made Maria realize just how cold she had been. "Sit," Isabella said, leading them to a comfortable booth. "First we eat, then we talk." As Isabella disappeared into the kitchen, Maria looked around the restaurant. It was elegant but cozy, with family photos on the walls and soft Latin music playing in the background. Emma had finally settled, her tiny hand gripping Maria's finger. "I remember being where you are," Isabella's voice came from the kitchen. 30 years ago, I was pregnant and alone in a new country. No money, no family, no hope." She emerged carrying a tray with warm milk, coffee, and what smelled like fresh bread. "Someone gave me a chance. Now it's my turn to do the same. The food she brought out was simple but seemed like a feast to Maria: eggs, beans, warm tortillas, and fresh fruit. As they ate, Isabella shared her story. How she started as a dishwasher, learned to cook, saved every penny, and eventually opened her first small restaurant. Now she owned 5 successful establishments across the city. "I need someone I can trust to manage this location," Isabella said as they finished eating. "Someone who understands the value of hard work and second chances. The job includes an apartment above the restaurant." Maria looked up from feeding Emma, her heart pounding. "But I only have experience as a waitress." Isabella smiled. "We all start somewhere. I'll teach you everything I know, just like someone taught me. The question is, are you willing to learn?" Tears filled Maria's eyes as she looked down at Emma, who was finally sleeping peacefully. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I am." "Good," Isabella said, reaching across the table to squeeze Maria's hand, "because I have a feeling this is the beginning of a beautiful story." As the morning sun streamed through the restaurant windows, casting warm shadows across the table, Maria felt something she hadn't felt in months: hope. She didn't know that this moment would lead to years of friendship, success, and eventually her own chance to help someone else in need. But for now, she held her sleeping daughter and let herself believe in second chances. The apartment above Casa Isabella was small but clean, with 2 bedrooms and a view of the quiet street below. Maria couldn't believe it was really hers. Isabella had helped her move in that very afternoon, bringing basic furniture and supplies for both her and Emma. "The kitchen needs someone with fresh energy," Isabella said as she showed Maria around the restaurant the next morning. Emma was sleeping peacefully in a portable crib Isabella had set up in the office. "Your training starts today." Maria's hands trembled as she tied on her new apron. The kitchen was bigger than any she'd worked in before, with shining stainless steel equipment that looked complicated and expensive. "I don't want to disappoint you," she admitted. Isabella laughed warmly. "The only way to disappoint me is to not try. Now let's start with breakfast prep." The first few weeks were harder than anything Maria had ever done. She learned to manage inventory, coordinate with suppliers, and handle the morning rush of customers. Every night she fell into bed exhausted but grateful. Emma was thriving in the small daycare center 2 blocks away, where Isabella had arranged a spot for her. But not everyone was happy about the new arrangement. Maria first noticed the tension when Antonio, Isabella's son, started showing up unannounced at the restaurant. He was in his mid-30s, dressed in expensive suits that reminded her of the businessmen who used to ignore her on the street corner. "Mother, this is ridiculous," she overheard him saying one afternoon. "You can't just pick up strays and put them in charge of a business. We have professional managers for that." "My restaurants, my decisions," Isabella replied firmly. "Maria has potential, just like I did when I started. That was different. You're too trusting. How do you know she won't steal from you? Have you even run a background check?" Maria's chest tightened as she pretended to wipe down tables in the dining room. She wanted to speak up, to defend herself, but fear kept her silent. Later that evening, as she was closing up, Isabella found her crying in the storage room. "Don't let Antonio's words hurt you," she said, pulling Maria into a warm hug. "He's afraid." "Afraid of me?" Maria wiped her eyes, confused. "Afraid of change. Afraid I'll give away his inheritance. Afraid of losing control." Isabella sighed. "He grew up with everything I didn't have, and sometimes that makes it hard for him to understand people who struggle." The next day, Maria worked harder than ever, determined to prove herself. She memorized recipes, learned to calculate food costs, and stayed late to perfect her techniques. When a regular customer complimented, "Hurry tea," coffee, she felt a surge of pride she hadn't experienced in years. But Antonio's words had planted a seed of doubt that grew when things started going wrong. First, it was small things: missing inventory, incorrect orders, mixed-up reservations. Then bigger problems emerged. A health inspector showed up 3 times in 2 weeks, citing violations that Maria was sure hadn't existed the day before. "Someone's trying to sabotage us," Isabella said one evening, reviewing the latest inspection report. "And I have a good idea who it is." Maria's hands shook as she prepared Emma's dinner upstairs. Maybe Antonio is right. Maybe I'm bringing you nothing but trouble. No, Isabella said firmly. You're family now, and family fights back. That night, after Emma was asleep, Isabella taught Maria about more than just cooking. She showed her how to review security footage, track every penny in the books, and document everything. Knowledge is power, she said, and you're about to get very powerful. The next few days brought more surprises. A young woman named Carmen started coming to the restaurant, sitting at the bar and watching Maria with intense interest. It wasn't until Maria overheard her on the phone that she realized who she was. Dad, I'm telling you, something's not right, Carmen was saying. This Maria girl, she's actually good at this, really good. Maybe we should... Antonio's daughter. The pieces started falling into place. But before Maria could process this information, something happened that changed everything. It was a busy Saturday night, and the restaurant was full. Maria was expediting orders when she heard a commotion in the dining room. A customer was choking. Without thinking, Maria rushed out. Her training as a former lifeguard kicked in, and she performed the Heimlich maneuver, saving the man's life. The customer turned out to be Michael Chen, a food critic from the city's biggest newspaper. Instead of writing about his near-death experience, he wrote about the incredible food and service at Casa Isabella and the manager, who saved his life while running a flawless kitchen. The review brought in more customers than ever. Maria's confidence grew with each successful service, and even some of Antonio's friends who came to criticize left with reluctant praise. But more importantly, Carmen started coming by more often, this time with questions about the business instead of suspicion. My grandfather was a cook, Carmen told Maria one quiet afternoon. Before he passed away, he always said the kitchen is where magic happens. I never understood until I watched you work. Maria saw something in Carmen's eyes that reminded her of herself, a hunger to learn, to prove herself. Would you like me to show you how to make your grandmother Isabella's special mole sauce? Carmen's eyes lit up, and for the first time, Maria saw a smile that transformed her whole face. Really? But isn't that a secret family recipe? Well, Maria said, thinking of Isabella's words, we're family now, aren't we? As they worked together in the kitchen, Maria realized that sometimes the best way to fight back isn't with anger or revenge, but with love and understanding. She didn't know it yet, but this moment would be the beginning of healing not just for her, but for the entire Rodriguez family. That night, as she tucked Emma into bed, Maria heard laughter from downstairs. Isabella and Carmen were still in the kitchen, and the smell of mole sauce filled the air. She smiled, remembering the cold corner where she once stood, never imagining that her life could change so completely. But the biggest challenges and surprises were still to come. Because Antonio wasn't done fighting, and his next move would test the strength of this newfound family in ways none of them could predict. The lunch rush was just ending when Antonio walked into Casa Isabella, but this time he wasn't alone. A tall man in an expensive suit followed him, carrying a leather briefcase. Maria's stomach tightened as she watched them sit at a corner table. "Where's my mother?" Antonio demanded when Maria approached. "We need to speak with her." "She's at the farmer's market," Maria answered, keeping her voice steady. "She'll be back in an hour." The man with the briefcase opened it and pulled out some papers. "I'm James Parker, from the health department," he said. "We've had some concerning reports about this establishment." Maria's hands gripped her order pad tighter. She'd learned enough from Isabella to know this wasn't a regular inspection. The timing was too perfect, and the way Antonio smiled told her everything she needed to know. "I can show you our inspection records and permits," Maria said. "Isabella keeps everything in perfect order." "That won't be necessary," James said. "We'll need to do a full inspection. Today, now." As they went through the kitchen, Maria watched them search for violations. She noticed how James touched surfaces and then wiped them with a cloth he brought, how he seemed to know exactly where to look. It was all too rehearsed. But Maria had been preparing for something like this. Every surface gleamed, every temperature log was perfectly maintained, and every item was labeled and dated according to code. Isabella had taught her well. "You won't find anything wrong," Maria said confidently. "We run a clean kitchen." Antonio's face darkened. "We'll see about that." Just then, Carmen burst through the kitchen doors. "Dad, stop this right now." She was breathing hard, like she'd run all the way there. "I heard what you were planning. This is wrong." The surprise on Antonio's face quickly turned to anger. "Carmen, this doesn't concern you. Go home." "No," Carmen stood her ground. "I won't let you destroy something beautiful just because you're afraid of change." Maria watched the father and daughter face off, their voices rising. Other staff members peeked in from the dining room, curious about the commotion. Then, like an answer to a prayer, Isabella's voice cut through the chaos. "What's going on in my kitchen?" Everyone turned to see Isabella standing in the doorway, still carrying bags of fresh produce. Her eyes took in the scene: the health inspector, the papers, her angry son, her defiant granddaughter, and Maria standing tall despite it all. "Mother," Antonio started, but Isabella held up her hand. "James Parker," she said, setting down her bags. "I remember you. Didn't you lose your license to practice law 3 years ago? How interesting to see you posing as a health inspector." The color drained from James's face. Antonio stepped forward, but Isabella wasn't finished. "Son, did you really think I wouldn't investigate the strange things happening at my restaurant? That I wouldn't have cameras installed after the first suspicious inspection? That I wouldn't recognize a setup when I saw one?" She pulled out her phone and played a video. On the screen, James and Antonio could be seen entering the kitchen late at night, placing things in corners, wiping surfaces with something from a bottle. "That's enough," Antonio snapped, reaching for the phone. "No, it's not enough." Isabella's voice was calm but firm. "You're my son, and I love you. But this stops now. Maria has earned her place here. She's family." "Family?" Antonio laughed bitterly. "Some stranger off the street is family now?" "Yes." Carmen stepped forward, standing beside Maria. "She is. She's taught me more about our family's legacy in a few weeks than you have in years." "Dad?" "She's teaching me to cook Grandma's recipes, showing me what it means to run a real kitchen." Maria felt tears in her eyes as Carmen took her hand. Isabella moved to stand on her other side, and suddenly she wasn't alone anymore. She was part of something bigger. "Antonio," Isabella said softly, "your father and I built this business from nothing. We took chances on people who needed them. That's our legacy. Your legacy, when did you forget that?" The mention of his father seemed to hit Antonio hard. He sat down heavily in a nearby chair, the fight going out of him. James Parker, seeing which way the wind was blowing, quietly gathered his fake papers and slipped out. "I just wanted to protect what's ours," Antonio said finally, his voice smaller than Maria had ever heard it. "Then help us grow it," Isabella replied. "There's room for everyone at this table." That evening, after the drama had died down, the kitchen was filled with an unusual sight. Antonio, sleeves rolled up, was learning to make tortillas alongside his daughter. Maria guided their hands, showing them how to pat the dough just right, while Isabella watched with tears of joy in her eyes. Emma crawled around their feet, playing with a wooden spoon, completely unaware of how close they'd come to losing everything. Or perhaps she knew, in that special way children have of understanding what really matters. "More flour," Maria instructed, and Antonio obliged, a small smile playing at his lips as his tortilla finally came out round. "Not bad," Carmen teased. "For a businessman." The kitchen filled with laughter, and Maria caught Isabella's eye. They shared a look of understanding. Sometimes family is born from blood, and sometimes it's born from something else, like a chance meeting on a cold street corner, or a shared love of food, or the willingness to believe in second chances. But their peace was about to be tested in ways none of them could imagine, because while they were celebrating their reconciliation, someone else was watching the restaurant with great interest. Someone from Maria's past, who was about to reappear and shake their newfound harmony to its core. The morning sun was just warming the kitchen of Casa Isabella when Maria noticed the envelope. It was plain white, with no return address, just her name written in familiar handwriting that made her blood run cold. She knew that writing. Jason. Her hands shook as she opened it, pulling out a single sheet of paper. "I know about the restaurant. We need to talk. I want to see my daughter." Maria sank into a kitchen chair, the letter falling from her fingers. After all this time, after abandoning them when she needed him most, now he wanted to talk. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too warm. "Maria, are you okay?" Carmen's voice snapped her back to reality. The young woman was standing in the doorway, concern written across her face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Emma's father," Maria managed to say. "He's back." Carmen's eyes widened. She picked up the letter, reading it quickly. "Have you told Grandma Isabella yet?" Maria shook her head. "I can't lose Emma. I can't lose all of this." Her voice cracked and Carmen rushed to hug her. "You won't," Carmen promised. "We won't let that happen." But the fear had already taken root. Throughout the morning prep, Maria kept making mistakes. Burning the beans, oversalting the soup, dropping a whole tray of glasses. Her mind was somewhere else, back on that street corner, alone and pregnant, reading Jason's last text. "I can't handle this right now, I'm sorry." Isabella noticed something was wrong the moment she arrived. One look at Maria's face, and she steered her into the office, closing the door behind them. Carmen had already told her about the letter. "Tell me everything," Isabella said, sitting Maria down. "From the beginning." So Maria did. She told Isabella about meeting Jason at the diner where she used to work, how charming he'd been, how he'd promised her the world. She told her about the pregnancy test, about his promises to stand by her, and about waking up one morning to find him gone, along with the money she'd saved for the baby. "I tried to find him," Maria said, wiping her eyes. "His phone was disconnected. His friends said he'd moved away. I was alone, and then I lost my job, and then you found us," Isabella finished, squeezing her hand. "Or we found you." "He has no right," Carmen said from the doorway. She'd been listening, her face tight with anger. "He can't just—" "I walked back in after all this time." Isabella stood up, her expression determined. "No, he can't. Maria, do you still have the paperwork from when Emma was born?" Maria nodded. "Everything's upstairs. Why?" "Because we're going to see my lawyer. Today." Isabella was already reaching for her phone. "Jason gave up his rights when he abandoned. Hugh will make it official." But before they could leave, Antonio burst into the office. "Mother, you need to see this." He was holding a tablet, showing a local news website. The headline made Maria's heart stop. "Local restaurant success story hides dark past." The article was vicious, filled with half-truths and implications. It painted Maria as a con artist who had manipulated her way into the Rodriguez family business. And there, quoted extensively throughout the piece, was Jason. "He's trying to destroy everything," Maria whispered, reading his words about how she had driven him away, how she was unfit to raise their child. "He's trying to take Emma." "The press is outside," Antonio said grimly. "They're asking for comments." Isabella's face hardened. "Antonio, call our PR team. Carmen, start calling our regular customers. We need their support. Maria, go get Emma from daycare. Bring her here where we can protect her." But when Maria reached the daycare, her worst nightmare was waiting. Jason was there, talking to the director, holding papers in his hand. He looked exactly as she remembered. Handsome, well-dressed, and wearing that smile that had once made her believe all his lies. "Maria," he said, turning to face her. "I was hoping to see you." "Get away from my daughter." Maria's voice shook, but she stood her ground. "Our daughter," Jason corrected smoothly. "I have rights, and I have proof that you're an unfit mother. Living above a restaurant? Working all hours? Is that any way to raise a child?" "Better than abandoning her before she was even born," Maria shot back. The daycare director looked uncomfortable. "Perhaps we should discuss this elsewhere." "There's nothing to discuss," a new voice said. Antonio stood in the doorway, his lawyer beside him. "Step away from the child, sir, or we'll call the police." Jason's smile faltered slightly. "This is a family matter." "Exactly," Antonio said, moving to stand beside Maria. "And you're not family." Emma started crying then, reaching for Maria from her playpen. Without hesitation, Maria pushed past Jason and scooped up her daughter, holding her close. She could feel Jason watching them, could feel the weight of his presence. "This isn't over," he warned. "Yes, it is," Antonio replied. My mother taught me something recently about protecting what matters. Family matters, real family. Now leave before I show you exactly what the Rodriguez family does to people who threaten our own. Back at Casa Isabella, the news vans were still. Outside, but something unexpected had happened. The sidewalk was filled with customers, regular customers, holding signs of support, forming a human barrier between the press and the restaurant. Carmen had called everyone she could think of, and they had responded. The old couple who came every Sunday for brunch, the businesswomen who held their weekly lunch meetings there, the college students who studied late into the night over endless cups of coffee. "See?" Isabella said, as they hurried Maria and Emma through the back door. "This is your family now, all of these people, and family protects its own." In the kitchen, Maria held Emma close, surrounded by the Rodriguezes, Isabella, Antonio, and Carmen. They had a long fight ahead of them. Jason wouldn't give up easily, and the press would keep digging. But for the first time since seeing that envelope, Maria felt strong. "We'll need a good lawyer," Antonio said, already making calls, "and a better PR strategy." "We'll need the truth," Isabella corrected. "The whole truth." Maria looked down at Emma, then at the family around her. "Then let me tell you everything. Because there's something about Jason that even he doesn't know. Something that could change everything." The kitchen fell silent as Maria began to speak, revealing a secret she'd kept buried since the day Jason left. A secret that would test this newfound family in ways they never expected, and would prove that sometimes the strongest bonds are the ones we choose to forge. The kitchen of Casa Isabella was silent as Maria pulled an old shoebox from her closet. Upstairs, her hands trembled as she removed a stack of papers, bank statements, letters, and a worn notebook. "Before Jason left," she began, spreading the papers on the kitchen table, "he was involved in something dangerous, something illegal." Isabella, Antonio, and Carmen leaned forward, their faces serious in the kitchen's warm light. Emma slept peacefully in her portable crib nearby, unaware of the storm brewing around her. "He was stealing from the diner where we worked," Maria continued. "Not just taking money from the register. He was using the business to launder money for some dangerous people. I found out just before he disappeared." Antonio picked up one of the bank statements, his eyes widening. "These transactions, they're all fake. Shell companies, inflated, numbers." "I kept everything," Maria said. "I was scared. I thought if anything happened to him, they might come after me, after Emma. That's why I couldn't go to the police." Carmen reached for Maria's hand. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" "Because I was ashamed. Because I fell for his lies. Because—" Maria's voice broke. "Because part of me still wanted to protect him for Emma's sake." Isabella stood up, her face set with determination. "Antonio, call Judge Martinez. Now we know why Jason really came back. He's not after Emma, he's after these papers." Just then the kitchen door burst open. One of the waiters rushed in, looking panicked. "There's a health inspector outside, and the police." Through the window they could see police cars and a crowd gathering. Jason stood among them, talking to an officer and pointing at the restaurant. "He's trying to force our hand," Antonio said, grimly. "Make us look bad enough that he can demand custody." But Isabella was already moving, gathering the papers. "Carmen, take Maria and Emma to the safe house, the lake house your grandfather bought. Antonio, call our lawyer and judge. Martinez, I'll handle the police." "I won't run," Maria protested. "I'm tired of running." "It's not running," Isabella said firmly. "It's strategizing. We need time to authenticate these documents to build a case. Jason doesn't know we have them yet. That's our advantage." The next hour was a blur of activity. While Isabella charmed the police and health inspectors at the front of the restaurant, Carmen led Maria and Emma through the back alley to a waiting car. Antonio stayed behind with his mother, his business expertise finally being used to protect the family rather than fight it. The drive to the lake house was tense. Carmen kept checking the rearview mirror, making sure they weren't followed. Emma slept through it all, clutching her favorite stuffed animal. "My grandfather bought this place years ago," Carmen explained as they pulled up to a beautiful house overlooking the lake. "He said everyone needs a sanctuary." The house was rustic but comfortable, with large windows and a wraparound porch. As they settled in, Maria's phone buzzed with messages from Isabella. The inspection was a bust, she read aloud. Everything was perfect, thanks to your management. The police had no grounds to investigate, but Jason's giving interviews to every news station that will listen. Carmen turned on the TV just in time to see Jason's face fill the screen. He looked polished, sympathetic, as he spun his tale of being a concerned father fighting to protect his child from an unstable mother. What he's not telling them, Maria said bitterly, is that the real reason he left was because his criminal friends threatened to hurt us if I ever told anyone what I knew. Then maybe it's time they knew, a deep voice said from the doorway. They spun around to find Antonio standing there, along with a distinguished-looking man in a suit. Maria, meet Richard Collins from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. He's very interested in those papers you kept. The FBI agent stepped forward, his expression kind but serious. We've been building a case against Jason's associates for years. Your evidence could be the key to bringing down their entire operation. Maria looked at Emma, still sleeping peacefully. If I help you, can you protect us? We can do better than that, Agent Collins replied. We can make sure Jason never bothers you again. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. While Maria worked with the FBI, sharing everything she knew, the Rodriguez family rallied around her. Isabella kept the restaurant running, turning the media circus into free publicity. Antonio used his business connections to gather more evidence against Jason. Carmen stayed with Maria and Emma at the lake house, providing support and protection. But Jason wasn't going down without a fight. One morning they woke to find someone had broken into the lake house during the night. Nothing was taken, but a message was left on the kitchen table. Last chance to do this the easy way. Instead of scaring them, the threat only made them more determined. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset over the lake, Maria made a decision. I want to tell my story, she said. All of it, no more hiding. Isabella, who had driven up to check on them, smiled. I know just the reporter to talk to. The next day, while Jason was giving another performance for the TV cameras outside Casa Isabella, a different story broke across all major networks. Maria's story. The truth about Jason's crimes, backed by evidence. The real reason he abandoned his pregnant girlfriend. The threats, the fear, the years of silence. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The same crowds that had gathered to support Casa Isabella now turned on Jason, their signs and shouts taking on a different tone. His carefully crafted image crumbled as former associates, smelling blood in the water, came forward with their own stories. But the biggest surprise came from an unexpected source. As federal agents led Jason away in handcuffs, a familiar face appeared at the lake house. It was Jason's mother, Patricia. I saw your interview, she said to Maria, her eyes filled with tears. I had no idea. I've spent years wondering about my granddaughter, wondering why Jason changed so much. Now I know. Maria looked at the older woman, seeing the same pain and hope she'd once seen in Isabella's eyes. Would you like to meet your granddaughter? As Emma toddled over to meet her other grandmother, Maria felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The truth was finally out, but it had brought healing rather than destruction. That evening, both families, the Rodriguezes and Patricia, gathered for dinner at Casa Isabella. The restaurant was closed to the public, but the kitchen was alive with activity as Isabella taught Patricia her secret recipes, while Emma played under the watchful eyes of both her grandmothers. Family, Isabella said, raising her glass in. A toast comes in many forms. Sometimes it finds us when we least expect it. Maria looked around the table at these people who had become her family, Isabella with her wisdom, Antonio with his protective strength, Carmen with her fierce loyalty, and now Patricia with her desire to make things right. They had all chosen to be here, chosen to stand together. But as they celebrated their victory, none of them noticed the figure watching from across the street, hidden in the shadows. Someone else from Jason's past who had their own scores to settle. Someone who wasn't finished with Maria or the Rodriguez family yet. Life at Casa Isabella had finally settled into a peaceful rhythm. The media circus had died down, and the restaurant was busier than ever. Maria's story had touched people's hearts, bringing in customers from all over the city who wanted to support her and the Rodriguez family. Emma now had two grandmothers, doting on her. Patricia visited every Sunday, bringing handmade dresses and trying to make up for lost time. Isabella watched with understanding eyes, remembering her own journey to forgiveness with Antonio. But peace never lasts long in stories. Like these, it started with small things. Orders going missing, deliveries arriving spoiled. Then reservations began disappearing from the system, leaving angry customers standing in the lobby while empty tables sat reserved for people who would never show up. "This isn't random," Antonio said one morning, reviewing the security footage. "Someone knows our system, our schedules, someone's targeting us." Maria was wiping down tables when she noticed a woman sitting alone in the corner. Something about her seemed familiar, the way she held her coffee cup, how she watched everything with careful eyes. When their gazes met, the woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Later that day, Maria found a note tucked under the register. "Jason says hello from prison, remember me? We need to talk." Her hands shook as memories flooded back. Rachel, Jason's ex-girlfriend, the one he'd been with before Maria, the one who had worked at the bank where all those suspicious transactions had taken place. She was part of it, Maria realized, rushing to find Isabella. Rachel, she helped Jason with the money laundering, but she wasn't arrested. She must have made a deal. Isabella's face darkened. "Antonio, call Agent Collins. Carmen, stay with..." "Emma, Maria, tell me everything you remember about this woman." But Rachel was already making her next move. That evening, as customers filled the restaurant, the health department showed up again. This time they found traces of contamination in the food. The restaurant would have to close immediately. "This is impossible," Maria protested, watching their regular customers leave disappointed. "I check everything personally." "Of course you do," Rachel's voice came from behind them. She stood in the doorway looking expensive and dangerous. "Just like you checked Jason's banking records, like you checked his background before letting him into your life." Antonio stepped forward, but Rachel held up her hand. "Careful. One phone call from me, and some interesting evidence about food tampering might find its way to the police." Evidence pointing directly at Maria. "What do you want?" Isabella demanded. Rachel's smile was cold. "Everything. The restaurant, the money, but mostly I want revenge. Jason was building something beautiful before Maria ruined everything. Now it's my turn to ruin her." "You're forgetting something," Carmen spoke up, her voice steady. "We're not the same people you tried to intimidate before. We're stronger now, together." Rachel laughed. "Sweet, but business is business. You have 24 hours to sign over the restaurant, or I start making phone calls." "Oh, and Maria, Jason wanted me to remind you, there are still people on the outside who owe him favors, lots of them." After she left, the family gathered in the kitchen. Patricia had rushed over as soon as she heard, bringing with her a surprising revelation. "I remember Rachel," she said. "She used to work at Jason's bank, but she was fired for stealing. Jason, he helped cover it up. That's how their whole scheme started." Maria looked around at the worried faces of her family. "I won't let her destroy what we've built. There has to be a way to stop her." Antonio was already on his phone, talking quietly in the corner. When he hung up, his expression was grim but determined. "Agent Collins is on his way, but we need proof that Rachel was involved, proof that she's behind the tampering." "Then let's get it," Carmen said firmly. "Dad, you know about business records. Mom, you know the restaurant industry. Maria knows their history, and I know how to be invisible when I need to be." Isabella watched her granddaughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "What are you suggesting?" "Rachel thinks she's dealing with the same scared people Jason pushed around," Carmen explained. "She's not. I can follow her, document everything, find out who she's working with." "It's too dangerous," Maria protested. "More dangerous than letting her destroy our family," Carmen countered. "Besides, I won't be alone. We'll all play our parts." They worked through the night, forming a plan. Antonio would set up a meeting with Rachel, pretending to consider her demands. Isabella would reach out to her contacts in other restaurants, tracking Rachel's movements. Patricia would use her social connections to dig into Rachel's past, and Carmen would become Rachel's shadow, armed with a small camera and years of watching her father navigate the business world. The next day, Rachel returned, expecting to find a broken family ready to surrender. Instead, she found Antonio waiting, with a contract and a smile that matched her own for coldness. "We've considered your offer," he said smoothly, "but we have a counter-proposal." As they talked business in the office, Carmen slipped out the back door, following Rachel's driver. Maria kept the restaurant running, her heart in her throat, praying their plan would work. What none of them expected was for Patricia to burst into the restaurant an hour later, her face flushed with excitement. "I found something. I found what really happened at the bank." But before she could explain, the lights in the restaurant went out. In the darkness, they heard Rachel's laugh. "Did you really think I came alone?" The emergency lights flickered on, revealing several men in dark sea. Clothes blocking the exits, Rachel stood from her meeting with Antonio, her smile triumphant. "Now," she said, "let's talk about what really happens when you try to outsmart me." The tension in the room was electric. Customers froze at their tables. Maria held Emma close. Isabella's hand found Antonio's shoulder. And somewhere in the darkness outside, Carmen was about to discover something that would change everything. Again, because Rachel had made one crucial mistake. She had forgotten that sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the ones making threats, but the ones quietly watching, waiting and protecting what they love. And the Rodriguez family, they had learned to be very dangerous indeed when it came to protecting their own. The darkness in Casa Isabella felt heavy with tension. Rachel's men blocked every exit, their faces hard in the dim, emergency lighting. Customers huddled at their tables, phones already recording the scene. Emma whimpered softly in Maria's arms. "Now then," Rachel said, walking slowly between the tables. "Let's talk about what Patricia found out, about what really happened at the bank." Patricia stood her ground, her voice steady. "I know you didn't just steal money. You stole evidence. Evidence that would have put Jason away years ago. Evidence that would have protected Maria before any of this started." Rachel's smile faltered slightly. "You don't know anything." "I know enough," Patricia continued. "I called my old friend Margaret, the bank manager you got fired. She kept copies of everything. She's been waiting years for someone to ask the right questions." Outside in the darkness, Carmen crouched behind Rachel's car, her phone recording everything. The driver was on a call, speaking in hushed tones. "It's going wrong," he was saying. "Rachel's losing control. Should we proceed with Plan B?" Carmen's heart raced as she texted her father. "They have another plan. Watch out!" Inside, Antonio felt his phone vibrate. He caught Isabella's eye and nodded slightly. They had prepared for this. "You know what your problem is, Rachel?" Isabella spoke up, her voice carrying across the silent restaurant. "You think you're the only one who knows how to play this game. But while you were planning your revenge, we were building a family. And family knows things." Rachel laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. "What are you talking about?" "We know about the offshore accounts," Antonio said calmly. "The ones you and Jason set up, the ones you're still using. We know about the other restaurants you've threatened," Isabella added, "the ones that mysteriously closed after refusing to launder money through their businesses. And I know," Maria stepped forward, still holding Emma, "about the real reason you hate me. It's not about Jason at all, is it? It's about what I found in those bank records, about who you really are." Rachel's face went pale. "Shut up. You're not just Jason's ex-girlfriend," Maria continued. "You're Marcus Delaware's daughter, the man who owns half the criminal enterprises in this city, the man Jason was really working for. Your father." The revelation sent whispers through the crowd of customers. Rachel's men shifted uncomfortably, looking to her for direction. "That's why you couldn't let the FBI find those records," Maria said. "They wouldn't just have exposed Jason, they would have exposed your whole family." Suddenly, the main lights blazed back on. Agent Collins stood in the doorway, flanked by FBI agents. "Rachel Delaware," he said clearly, "we've been looking for you." "Nobody move." Rachel pulled out a gun, pointing it at Maria and Emma. "I swear I'll—" But she never finished her sentence. From behind, Carmen, who had slipped back in through the kitchen, swung a heavy cast iron pan. Rachel crumpled to the floor as her men raised their hands, surrounded by agents. "Got it all on video," Carmen said, holding up her phone, including the part where her driver admitted to Plan B, burning down the restaurant for insurance fraud. The next hour was chaos of a different kind. FBI agents took statements while paramedics checked everyone for injuries. Rachel was led away in handcuffs along with her men. Customers hugged and cried, then insisted on staying to help clean up. "How did you know?" Maria asked Patricia later, as they all sat exhausted in the kitchen. "About Margaret and the bank records?" Patricia smiled sadly. "Because I used to work at that bank too. Years ago, I knew Margaret. When Jason started dating Rachel, Margaret tried to warn me about the Delaware family. I didn't listen. I thought my son knew what he was doing." Isabella reached across the table to squeeze Patricia's hand. "You helped make it right. That's what matters." "We all did," Antonio said, looking proudly at Carmen. "Though maybe next time, Mija, we find a less dangerous way to gather evidence." Carmen grinned. "Where's the fun in that?" Emma, who had been quiet through everything, suddenly pointed at the kitchen door. "Look!" They turned to see Margaret herself, standing there carrying a thick folder. "I heard there was some excitement here tonight. Thought these might help with the investigation." She held up the folder. "Copies of everything Rachel and Jason tried to hide. Been keeping them safe for just the right moment." As Agent Collins carefully took the folder, Maria felt tears in her eyes. Everything had come full circle. The evidence she had found years ago, the truth she had tried to expose, it had all led to this moment. But their victory celebration was interrupted by a commotion outside. Through the windows, they could see camera crews setting up, reporters going live. "The story's already breaking," Antonio said, checking his phone. "Local restaurant family exposes criminal empire. We're going to be bigger than ever." Isabella smiled. "Then we better start planning the expansion." "Expansion?" Maria asked. "Of course," Isabella said. "Every good story needs a sequel. And I think now it's time Casa Isabella became Casa Isabella and family." As they talked about the future, making plans and sharing dreams, none of them noticed the small red light blinking under one of the tables. Rachel might be gone, but someone was still watching. Someone who had much bigger plans for the Rodriguez family and their little restaurant. Because in stories like these, every ending is just a new beginning, and the biggest challenges often come disguised as victories. The night was ending, but tomorrow would bring new customers, new opportunities, and new threats. The restaurant would open its doors, the kitchen would come alive, and the Rodriguez family, now bigger and stronger than ever, would face whatever came next. Together. Just as they had faced everything else. But first they had a celebration to plan. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about living well, loving fiercely, and making sure your family's table always has room for one more. The morning paper carried their story on the front page. Family restaurant. Brings down crime ring blazed across the top, with a photo of the entire Rodriguez family, including Maria, Emma, and Patricia, standing proudly in front of Casa Isabella. "We're going to need a bigger kitchen," Isabella said, watching the line of customers stretching around the block. News vans were still parked across the street, reporters doing live updates about the restaurant that served justice alongside dinner. But not all attention was welcome. Maria noticed the sleek black car that drove past 3 times that morning, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. Antonio caught her watching and squeezed her shoulder. "Just because we're paranoid doesn't mean they're not watching," he said. "I've hired extra security. No one's getting near this family again." Inside the restaurant, Carmen was training new waitstaff. The publicity had forced them to expand quickly, and Isabella insisted on maintaining their high standards despite the crushing crowds. "Each person who walks through that door isn't just a customer," she told the new hires. "They're a guest in our home, and in this family we treat guests like gold." Patricia had become a regular fixture at the restaurant, helping with the books and sharing stories about Jason's childhood. The good times, before everything went wrong. It helped Maria understand Emma's father better. And somehow that made it easier to move forward. But peace has a way of hiding trouble. It started with a letter. Thick cream paper, expensive letterhead. An offer to franchise Casa Isabella across the country. The money involved made Antonio's eyes go wide. "This could be huge," he said during their family meeting. "We're talking national exposure, multiple locations, real empire building." Empire? Isabella's voice carried a warning note. That's a dangerous word in this family. Maria studied the letter more closely. "Delaware Holdings," she read. "Why does that sound familiar?" Carmen grabbed her laptop, fingers flying across the keys. "Because it's a subsidiary of..." Oh no. They all leaned in to look. Delaware Holdings was owned by Marcus Delaware, Rachel's father, the man behind everything. "He's trying to buy us out," Antonio realized. "Control the narrative, make it look like we're all one big happy business family." "Over my dead body," Isabella said firmly. The next day, more letters arrived. Other restaurant groups, legitimate ones, all wanting a piece of their success. And with them came a note, unsigned but clear. "Take our offer. The alternatives are less pleasant." Maria found Emma's daycare had suddenly lost their license. Antonio's car developed mysterious brake problems. Carmen's college applications were flagged for fraud. Small things, easily explained away. But the message was clear. "They're trying to squeeze us," Antonio said. "Make us desperate enough to sell." But Isabella just smiled. "They don't know who they're dealing with." "Maria, remember what I taught you about my grandmother's secret recipe?" Maria nodded. "That sometimes the best defense is to make something so good, people can't stay away." "Exactly, so let's give them something to talk about." The next week, Casa Isabella unveiled a new menu. Traditional dishes with modern twists, each one telling part of their story. The Homecoming, Isabella's original family recipes. The Second Chance, Maria's special fusion dishes. The Peacemaker, Patricia's contribution, combining old and new. The food critics went wild. Lines got longer. Delaware Holdings sent more letters, each one more desperate than the last. Then came the television producers. They wanted to do a reality show about the restaurant, the family, their triumph over adversity. The exposure would be massive. "Think about it," the producer said, spreading glossy concept art across their table. "America loves an underdog story. And yours? It's perfect." Carmen was excited. Antonio saw the business potential. Even Patricia thought it might help change the narrative about her son. But Maria noticed something odd about the production company's paperwork. A familiar name buried in the fine print. Another Delaware shell company. "They're trying to control our story," she realized. "Use our own success against us." That night, as they closed up, Isabella gathered everyone in the kitchen. The heart of their home, where everything important happened. "You know what my father used to say?" she asked, running her hand along the well-worn counter. "The best recipes can't be bought. They have to be earned, made with love and time and trust." She looked at each of them. Maria, who had grown so strong. Antonio, who had learned to fight for family instead of against it. Carmen, whose courage had saved them all. Patricia, who had found her way home. And little Emma playing with pot lids on the floor. "So here's what we're going to do," Isabella continued. "We're going to tell our own story. Our way." Maria caught her meaning first. "The cookbook," Isabella nodded. "Not just recipes, our story, every dish, every triumph, every struggle. We'll publish it ourselves." "A food memoir," Carmen said excitedly. "I can handle the social media campaign." "With photos," Patricia added. "I have pictures of Jason as a boy, cooking with his grandfather. Show the whole story." "And I know just the person to write it," Antonio said, looking at Maria. Maria felt tears in her eyes. "Me? Who better?" Isabella smiled. "You lived it, from that street corner to right here, the heart of our family." As they planned late into the night, none of them noticed the small red light still blinking under the table, or the figure watching from the building across the street speaking quietly into a phone. "They're not selling..." "No, sir. They're doing something else." "A book?" "Yes, Mr. Delaware, I understand." "No, sir, that won't be necessary. I have a better idea. The watcher smiled, watching the family through high-powered binoculars. Sometimes the best way to destroy a story isn't to end it, it's to change it from within. But that would have to wait. Because right now, in the warm kitchen of Casa Isabella, a family was building something stronger than any business empire. They were writing their own story, one page at a time. And somewhere in the city, Marcus Delaware was about to learn that some things can't be bought, controlled, or destroyed. Some things, like love and family and the perfect recipe, can only be earned. The night grew late, but the lights of Casa Isabella stayed on, a beacon in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight was for family, for planning, for hope, and for wondering what secret that blinking red light was keeping, waiting to be discovered. The cookbook project had taken over Casa Isabella. Every surface in the office was covered with old photos, recipe cards and draft pages. Maria spent her mornings writing, turning their story into something beautiful. The words flowed easily. After all, she had lived every moment. Carmen was the one who found the blinking light under the table. She had dropped her phone, and while reaching for it, spotted the tiny red dot. "Dad!" She called out. "I think we have a problem." Antonio examined the device carefully. "It's not just a bug," he said. "It's a camera. Someone's been watching us." But when they tried to remove it, they found something strange. The device had a familiar logo, one they had seen before. FBI? Maria looked confused. Why would they still be watching us? The answer came that afternoon. Agent Collins arrived looking grave. "We need to talk, all of you." In the closed restaurant, he laid out photos across their biggest table. They showed Marcus Delaware meeting with someone. Someone they knew. "That's impossible," Maria whispered. That's Jason's lawyer, the public defender who helped him make his deal." "Not a public defender," Agent Collins said. "Martha Chen is Delaware's personal attorney. She's been working for him for 20 years, and she's the one who made sure Jason took the fall for everything." The implications hit them hard. Jason hadn't just been part of Delaware's organization. He'd been set up to take the blame when things went wrong. "There's more," Agent Collins continued. "We believe Rachel's arrest was part of their plan. Get her out of the way, make you feel safe, then move in with legitimate-looking business offers." "But why?" Isabella demanded. "Why all this elaborate planning?" "Because of what's really in those bank records," a new voice said. They turned to see Margaret in the doorway, holding a new folder. "The evidence I gave you before? It was only part of the story. The real bombshell is this." She laid out more. Documents, bank transfers, property deeds, and something that made Isabella gasp. A very familiar signature. That's my late husband's signature," she said. "From 30 years ago." Margaret nodded. "Your husband, Roberto Rodriguez, was Marcus Delaware's first partner. They built their empires together. But Roberto wanted out when he realized what Marcus was really doing. The night he died in that car accident." "It wasn't an accident," Antonio finished, his voice hollow. "Delaware killed my father." The silence in the restaurant was deafening. Emma, sensing the tension, crawled into Maria's lap. "So all of this," Carmen said slowly, "everything with Jason, Rachel, the threats, it's all been about getting back what Delaware thinks belongs to him. The restaurant." "Not just the restaurant," Agent Collins explained. "Your father's original investment helped build Delaware's entire organization. By law, the Rodriguez family owns half of everything." Isabella sat down hard. "Roberto tried to tell me that last night. He said he'd found a way to make things right, but he had to meet someone first." "We've been building a case against Delaware for decades," Agent Collins said, "but we could never get close enough. Now, with your cookbook project, we have a chance." Maria looked up sharply. "The watcher across the street in the building," Agent Collins nodded. "One of ours, keeping you safe. But someone else has been watching too." As if on cue, the restaurant's doors opened. Martha Chen walked in, elegant and deadly in her designer suit. "Well," she said smoothly, "this saves me the trouble of breaking all this to you myself." "You're not welcome here," Isabella stood. "But," Martha held up a hand. "Actually, I am, because I have a message from Marcus. He's dying." The revelation landed like a bomb. Martha continued. Cancer, 6 months at most. He wants to make things right. The real reason for all this, he wants to meet, to tell you the truth about Roberto's last night, and to give you what's rightfully yours. It's a trap, Antonio said immediately. Probably, Martha agreed. But it's also true. The meeting is tomorrow night. Come to the old factory where Roberto died. Bring the original documents, and Marcus will bring the truth. After she left, they sat in stunned silence. 30 years of lies, murder, and manipulation, all leading to this moment. We have to go, Isabella said finally. I need to know what really happened to Roberto. Not alone, Maria said firmly. We go together. All of us. Agent Collins started to protest, but Carmen cut him off. Family protects family, that's what we do. They spent the night preparing. Antonio called in every security contact he had. Carmen set up cameras and tracking devices. Maria wrote furiously, adding this new chapter to their story. But it was Patricia who provided the most surprising help. I have something, she said, arriving breathless. Something Jason told me years ago about the old factory. About a hidden room where Delaware kept his real records. As midnight approached, they gathered in the kitchen, their heart, their home. Isabella led them in a prayer, the same one Roberto had taught her years ago. Whatever happens tomorrow, she said, remember this moment. Remember that love is stronger than fear. Truth is stronger than lies and family. Family is stronger than vampire. They held each other close, not knowing that across town in a penthouse office, Marcus Delaware was having a very different conversation. Everything's ready? He asked Martha. Yes, when the Rodriguez family arrives tomorrow, they'll find all the answers they're looking for. She paused. And more than they bargained for. Delaware looked out over his city, touching the old photo on his desk. Him and Roberto, young and smiling before it all went wrong. Roberto always said the truth would come out eventually, he murmured. Well, old friend, tomorrow it finally will. But whose truth? And at what cost? Because in the game they were about to play, every answer would come with a price. And not everyone would survive to see the final chapter of this story. The old factory loomed against the night sky, its broken windows reflecting the full moon. Maria held Emma close as they approached, surrounded by their family. Isabella led the way, clutching Roberto's old documents in her purse. Antonio and Carmen flanked them protectively, while Patricia brought up the rear. Agent Collins and his team were hidden nearby, watching and waiting. But this moment belonged to the family. Inside, emergency lights cast long shadows across rusty machinery. Their footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. At the center of the vast space stood Marcus Delaware, looking smaller than Maria had imagined. Illness had taken its toll. His expensive suit hung loose on his frame. Martha Chen stood beside him along with 2 security guards, but it was the other person in the room that made them all stop short. Jason, Patricia whispered. He stood there in prison clothes, hands cuffed, looking older and tired. Mom, he said softly, I'm sorry. Touching, Marcus said. But we're here for bigger things than apologies. He turned to Isabella. You look just like you did 30 years ago, Bella. The night Roberto died, Isabella's voice was steady. Tell me why he was your friend. Friend? Marcus laughed, then coughed. He was my brother. Not by blood, but by choice. We built everything together, and then he wanted to tear it all down. He nodded to Martha, who opened a briefcase and removed an old VHS tape. Roberto made this the night he died. Insurance, he called it. I've kept it safe all these years. A small TV was wheeled in. The tape started playing, showing Roberto Rodriguez, 30 years younger, sitting at his desk. If you're watching this, the recording began, then Marcus has finally decided to tell the truth. I found proof of what he's been doing. The real business behind our legitimate ones. The murders, the corruption, all of it. I'm meeting him tonight to end this. Isabella, my love, if something happens to me, everything you need is in the safe. The combination is the day we met. The video continued, but Marcus raised his hand. You know what happened next. Roberto came here, tried to convince me to confess when I refused. His voice cracked. I didn't give the order, I swear on my life. Someone else wanted him dead. Who? Isabella demanded. the same person who's been orchestrating everything since then. The one who set up Jason, who pushed Rachel into her scheme, who's been playing us all. Martha Chen smiled, pulling out a gun. Bravo, Marcus. Finally figured it out, did you? Everything happened at once. The security guards drew their weapons, not on the Rodriguez family, but on Martha. Marcus stumbled back as Martha's gun swung toward him. 30 years, she said. 30 years of watching you two. Idiots play at being kings. Roberto was going to ruin everything, our whole organization. Someone had to protect the empire. You killed my father? Antonio stepped forward, but Carmen held him back. I did what needed to be done, Martha said. Just like I did with Jason here, so easy to manipulate. A few suggestions here, a little pressure there, all to bring us to this moment. Maria's mind raced. The cookbook. You wanted us to write the story so you could control how it ended. Smart girl. The perfect ending. Marcus confesses to Roberto's. Murder. The Rodriguez family gets their revenge and I step in to run everything. Poetry. There's just one problem, Isabella said calmly. You forgot the most important ingredient in any good story. And what's that? Family. The word was a signal. Carmen threw something, a flash grenade she'd hidden in her jacket. As it exploded, chaos erupted. FBI agents poured in from every entrance. The security guards, actually Delaware's loyal men, tackled Martha. When the dust settled, Martha Chen was in handcuffs. Marcus Delaware was being helped up by Antonio, while Jason was embracing his mother, his own cuffs being removed by Agent Collins. He's been working with us, Collins explained, gathering evidence against Martha from inside prison, part of a deal for a reduced sentence. Isabella walked over to Marcus, who looked decades older in the harsh light. Did you really not know? All these years? I suspected, he admitted, but facing the truth meant facing my own guilt. I let Roberto down, let everyone down. Then help us make it right, she said. Tell us everything. Help Jason start over. Give your empire to people who'll use it for good. 6 months later, Casa Isabella had become Casa Familia, a chain of community restaurants run by the Rodriguez Foundation. Each location helped people like Maria, giving them second chances, teaching them the business. The cookbook became a bestseller, not just for its recipes, but for its story of love, redemption, and the true meaning of family. Jason, now working at one of the restaurants under supervision, was slowly rebuilding his relationship with Emma. Marcus Delaware didn't live to see Christmas, but before he died, he signed everything over to the foundation. Martha Chen went to prison, her web of manipulation finally broken. One quiet evening, as the original Casa Isabella was closing, Maria found Isabella sitting at her usual table, looking at old photos. Roberto would be proud, Maria said, sitting beside her. Of all of us, Isabella smiled through tears. He used to say that a restaurant is just walls and tables until love makes it a home. Look what love built here. They looked around at their family, Antonio teaching Emma to make tortillas while Carmen filmed it for their new cooking channel, Patricia and Jason setting tables for tomorrow, Agent Collins stopping by for his usual coffee. You know, Isabella said, when I found you on that street corner, I thought I was saving you, but really you helped save all of us. Maria hugged her tight. That's what family does. Outside, the sign for Casa Familia glowed warmly in the darkness. Inside, the kitchen hummed with life and love and second chances. And somewhere, Roberto Rodriguez was smiling, knowing his family had finally found their way home. Because in the end, the greatest recipe of all isn't found in any cookbook. It's the one that brings people together, that turns strangers into family, that transforms a simple corner restaurant into a beacon of hope. And at Casa Familia, that recipe would be passed down for generations to come, seasoned with love, spiced with forgiveness, and shared with anyone who needed a place to belong. Emma, now 4 years old, put it best when a customer asked her what made their restaurant special. It's easy, she said, with the wisdom of a child. Everything here is cooked with love, and love makes everything taste like home. The end.